Hey guys, this little video is going to be kind of a substitution for the class that we would have today, where we would be going over the worksheet that I gave y'all to print out and bring to class on Canvas. So we are working on section 1.3 worksheet. So if you could have a copy of that, or at least the questions written down somewhere close by you as we go through it step by step, that'll help you guys out a lot. You can kind of stop the video and fill it out as you go along ahead of me, or you can wait on my explanation and work through it that way. That's fine too. There's no need to bring this to class Wednesday to turn in unless there's something on it that you want me to take a look at for you. If you've made a mistake and you don't understand what the problem is, then you can bring it by and I'll be glad to take a look at it and I'll talk to you about it. Otherwise, don't worry about bringing it. We won't do a daily grade for today since we're not having class. The first thing I want to tell you is that I'm sorry, but I have a misspelled word, very obviously, right in the very first line of the worksheet. For some reason, lately, when I've been typing the word equation, my I has decided to sneak over and sit by the A instead of after the T where it's supposed to be. So I apologize for that. I did not notice it before I saved it as a PDF and uploaded it to Canvas, or I would have fixed it. So anyway, it looks stupid, but y'all forgive me for that, okay? All right, the first question there is to list the steps for solving and completing the square problem. Okay, so let's talk about how we solve by completing the square. When you solve a quadratic by completing the square, you typically start with the equation written in that general form, ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Okay, I'm sorry, that didn't look too much like a 2 there, does it? All right, so the first thing that you're going to do, and you don't always have to do this because most of the time with problems that we'll do anyway, this first, whoa, that's weird looking highlighter, isn't it? This first, maybe I should have picked a different color for that. That A value that you get first there is, it may not be there at all. Okay, that may just be a 1. Okay, but if you do have that, let's see if I can get rid of that really ugly. Yeah, there we go. If you do have the A there, what you're going to do first, and this should be your first step that you write down, is you're going to divide through by that coefficient on the x squared term. Okay, so that'll be your first step. Let's see. Abbreviated coefficient there, okay? Sorry, that looks kind of bad. Divide through by the coefficient on x squared, okay? What that'll do is give you a positive 1 as a coefficient on x squared. So even if it's just a negative out in front of x squared, go ahead and divide through by that. That's both sides. All right, so every term that's there in that quadratic and the 0 on the other side, okay? Once you get that done, the next thing that you're going to do, all right, I thought it'd be better to type that one instead of writing it since my handwriting is so bad on this particular app. You want to move the constant to the other side of the equation, okay? So whatever your constant is, if you had to divide through by C, you'll have, or divide through by A rather, you'll have A over C, there is your constant. You're going to add that or subtract it to both sides to move it, okay? So that at this point, all you've got on one side is an x squared and an x term, and then on the other side, you'll have a constant, okay? Now, on to your next step. Your next step is to take half the coefficient on x and square it, okay? That's going to give you a constant. This is the constant that you need to complete the square on the x squared on the x terms. What you're going to get once you add this coefficient or this constant back to the side with the x squared and the x, you are going to have a perfect square trinomial at that point, okay? And so that's going to give you your square. That's the completing the square that the name of this method talks about. Now the next thing is to add that constant to both sides of the equation, okay? What that's going to do is balance the equation. You get your perfect square trinomial on one side, and you get your changed constant on the other side. Okay? Now, what this is going to give us, we are going to have a perfect square trinomial that we can factor into a binomial squared on one side and a constant on the other. And then once we get that form, what we can do is we can use the square root procedure to finish the problem. Okay, so still a couple of steps left to do. We factor the perfect square trinomial, then we use the square root procedure to solve. So those are your steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different steps that you're going to put in that list right there. And you can come back to these steps as you go through the problems just to make sure you're on the right track. Now understand that, between WebAssign and this worksheet, that may not be enough practice for you. Okay, you may need to dig into the textbook and try some of the problems that are in there as well. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I believe I put y'all a couple of suggested problems for this section on Canvas. If I didn't, I'll go back in there and do that, okay? All right, let's move on to the next question. Write the constant that you need to add to the variable terms to complete the square. And then I've got an A, B, C, and D. There is one of this type of problem on the midterm, okay? It's kind of an unusually done problem, but the reason why it's done this way is because if I just say solve the quadratic equation and you don't like to complete the square, then you can solve that particular quadratic equation using another method like the quadratic formula or something like that. So what this question does is it forces you to learn at least a little bit about this method. This is not a bad method to use, and people who are really used to doing solving by completing the square tend to like it a lot, in fact. It's just that most everybody uses quadratic formula for quadratics that you can't factor, okay? This is sort of an alternative to using the quadratic formula. All right, so let's take a look at these. Pull us up a new slide here. All right, remember what the instructions are. Okay, I want you to pay close attention to the wording here and notice that it does not ask you to solve. Okay, these problems are not asking you to solve them. I just need to know what that constant is in the step where you take half the coefficient on the x term and square it. Okay, that's all we're looking for here. So the first one is asking that question for x squared plus 8x. So all you have to do is take half the coefficient on x and square it. Okay, so what's that going to be? We're going to get a 4. 4 squared is 16. So that's the number I want right there. You don't even have to add it back. So we're just doing one step out of that whole process with these questions. B part, same question for x squared minus 10x. 10 divided by 2 squared. You're going to get a 5 there. 5 squared is 25. C, x squared minus 3x. Now these get a little bit trickier here because we don't get just a integer, okay? We've got 3 halves. I can't reduce that. 3 halves squared. It's really easy to square a fraction. You just square the top and the bottom, okay? And then let me scoot down just a little bit so we've got a little bit more room for D part. This again is one with a fraction. X squared plus 11x. Try that one for a second. All right, again, you're just going to square top and bottom both. I can't reduce that. So it's 121 over 4. You do want to look at it once it's squared just to make sure you can't reduce it, but we can't. Okay, these are all going to be odd numbers over 4, so you're not going to, you're not run into anything that you're going to be able to reduce like that. And when you see something like that, that you have to go through the entire process of solving the quadratic, you're going to get fractions as you work through it, as you can see here. So just be careful with those. Also, if you've got to divide through by that leading coefficient, you're going to wind up with some fractions. You're not going to see an awful lot of those, mainly just in the book homework. Don't think there's one on WebAssign set up like that. I think the ones on WebAssign are more like these first two right here. My highlighter works a little bit better, doesn't it? Okay. All right, so let's move on to our next question, which is just straight up solve by completing the square. And I've got a couple of these for you. One, actually, they're both mirrored. Well, no, the second one's not. The first one, A part, is connected to this number B right here. It has those first two terms. All right, so let's take a look at it. And this is just solved by completing the square, so I'm not going to make a big deal out of rewriting those instructions. A part is x squared minus 10x plus 8. Be sure if you hadn't already done these on your own, give yourself a chance to try this before, like watch the video where I explain it, where I do the lecture, and try this before you go any farther in this particular video, okay? It's not going to do you any good unless you practice a few of these. So my hope is that you've already watched the other videos and tried this worksheet, and now you're just kind of going through and checking to make sure you've done everything correctly, okay? If you haven't done that already, just be sure you pause for a few minutes, take time to do that, okay? All right, so let's see where we are here. The first step is divide through by that leading coefficient, which we don't have. The second step is going to be to take half. Second step is to move the constant, forgive me. You can actually do that third. That's why I've gotten a little bit mixed up there. Go ahead and move the 8 over. And then take half the coefficient on x and square that. So we're going to go 25 from that. Okay, so x squared minus 10x. Next step is to take that constant and add it back to both sides. All right, so let's see. 25 minus 8 would be 17. Okay. Then the next step is to take this quadratic and factor it. It is a perfect square quadratic. If you're a little rusty on factoring those, they can be factored the regular way, but what happens is the two factors are going to be identical to each other. The reason why it's called a perfect square trinomial is because it actually comes from a binomial that's been squared. You can look in section P4 to kind of reacquaint yourself with the formula for taking one of those apart, or you can just factor it the long way around. Just be sure you remember that you will get the same factor for both factors, and you need to write it like that, okay? This is going to give me x minus 5 squared. It's actually the square root of the first term, the sign on the second, and then the square root of the last term. That's all that this is right here. Real easy to factor. All right, so that's going to be equal to 17 over here. Let me scooch up a little bit. Now from here, you just start the process of the square root property, okay? So square root of both sides gives me x minus 5 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 17. Remember that from the other day. I can't simplify this any. Okay, 17 is not a perfect square, and besides 1, it doesn't have a factor that is a perfect square. So all I can do here is move that 5 over. So I've got 5 plus or minus the square root of 17. And be real careful in WebAssign when you write both of these down. Remember, there's no plus or minus in WebAssign. So type the first one out, then be sure you're out from under the root when you put the comma. If it's stuck up under there, it will tell you it's wrong. So if you get a wrong answer on this, check that first. Make sure you're completely outside of that root. I know that if you're working on like an iPad, sometimes it's kind of difficult to make it go outside. But if you'll tap, with your finger, with a stylus or whatever, as far as you can, to the right inside that box on WebAssign, it will bring it out from under the root, and you'll be able to put the comma there, okay? So just make sure you're all the way out before you put the comma. All right, so that's let's answer the first one. All right, let's take a look at the second one there. All right, so make sure I've got myself enough room. And we'll do this one black. B part is x squared plus 3x plus 5 equals 0. And I'll tell you what I'll probably do is after I get through with this one, we'll probably stop this video and upload it, and then I'll do another one for the rest of the worksheet, because I don't want it to get too awful long, or y'all will get so bored you can't stand to go through the worksheet, okay? So I'll do sort of a part 1 and a part 2, maybe even a part 3 if we get long enough before I get to the Pythagoreans. All right, so anyway, we don't have an a to divide through by, but we do have a constant to move. So x squared plus 3x is equal to -5. Take half the coefficient on x and square it. That's going to give you 9/4. So I've got x squared plus 3x plus 9/4. And knowing that little factoring formula for the perfect square trinomials will come in real handy right there, and I'll show you how in a minute. Since I know I got to combine -5 with 9/4, let's go ahead and write -5 as something over 4. All we have to do is multiply it top and bottom by 4, and we'll have that. Plus 9/4. Speed up a bit. Alright, so now, like I said, the formula comes in real handy since we have the fraction here. So it's the square root of the first, then the first sign, then the square root of the last. So that's going to be 3/2 right there. Put those two fractions together. -20 plus 9 is going to give me a -11/4. And then just proceed as we did before. We're going to have an imaginary one this time. So x plus 3/2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of -11/4. I can take the root of 4, but not 11. So we'll go ahead and split that up. Alright, so x plus 3/2 is equal to plus or minus. Go ahead and bring the I out. Square root of 11/2. Okay? And then you're able to subtract the 3/2. Okay, so let's bring that over. -3/2 plus or minus I times the square root of 11/2. Okay? And as with the other, if you did have one like this in WebAssign, you just need to be sure you wrote it 2 pieces. Okay? So that takes you through the first part of the worksheet. Like I said, I think I'll stop here. And then in another video, I'll give you the rest of the worksheet. Okay? So yeah.